Hey everyone, my name is Ivan Shermok. I'm a solutions architect at Tigera. In this session, I'm going to walk through a few options how to create an AKS cluster and configure that with Calico, either Calico CNI or Calico Network Policy Engine. And here's a brief agenda. We'll go through a very high-level overview of what Calico is, what Project Calico is, then look into AKS networking options and some design considerations, take a look into a few diagrams of how Calico policy is getting set up and how the networking gets configured in AKS. And then we'll dive into a demo to create one of the clusters. I'm planning to demo two clusters that I have. One of those I already set up, and it's a little bit more complex configuration, but it is all described in the GitHub repo that you can see down here. So you can follow the instructions in that guide to create the more complex configuration. And I'm going to set up just all managed cluster, all managed AKS cluster with managed Calico, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So just a quick reference to what Calico is. Calico, or known as Project Calico, is an open source software that is developed and maintained by the community and provides networking and network security options for containers, virtual machines, and host-based workloads. The approach to networking that Calico had chosen allowed it to be labeled as a very fast solution because it uses native Linux data plane and layer 3 network without encapsulation. The traffic can be encapsulated if you want, but for the best performance, non-cap would be the best choice. It is scaling to the limits of the internet. It uses BGP protocol under the hood, so the scalability of that is quite large. You can imagine. The popularity of the project led to public cloud providers adopting Calico as an option or as a standard network policy engine for managed Kubernetes clusters. It has also been integrated by the vendors into on-prem Kubernetes distributions such as Docker Enterprise, Rancher, OpenShift, and it runs on a massive scale in large enterprises. We know of over 150,000 clusters where Calico is used. Quick slide on a few labels that use Calico today, and a few words about the collaboration with the community that Tigera team had in the early days when Istio was launched. Tigera team was one of the teams that co-led the launch of Istio project, and in fact had contributed some filters to that project. Before I jump into AKS networking options, quick overview of Calico Enterprise. Calico Enterprise is built on top of Project Calico, and the main focus in there is for ease of use in day 2 operations, as well as providing some additional extra features mostly utilized in the enterprises. You can see that the Calico itself can be installed in a wide range of Kubernetes distributions. From cloud on the left-hand side, you represent the managed cloud solutions for Kubernetes are represented, then can also be installed in on-prem Kubernetes distros as well as cover VMs and bare metals, extend to outside of the cluster as well. So now about AKS networking options and policy options. There are several settings that affect how your AKS cluster is going to be built. The most basic one is called KubeNet, where basic networking is set up with host local IPAM without any network policy. And the option, you can see the option that's for Azure CLI, AKS, whenever you build in the cluster. So if you use network plugin KubeNet without mentioning any policy, then that's your setup. That's what your setup is going to be. Then there is another option where you use KubeNet plus Calico, and that's somewhat misleading when you read in documentation, because under the hood, AKS cluster gets configured with Calico CNI and Calico Network Policy Engine. It still uses host local IPAM, but the fact that there is Calico CNI in the cluster, that's not quite the pure KubeNet option. And then there are two other options that you can use. You can use advanced networking, such as Azure CNI. Use Azure CNI for the Azure IPAM, which connects directly to the VNet where your cluster resides, and use Azure Network Policy, or you can use Azure CNI and Calico Network Policy. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So just to go through a few details on how networking gets configured in Azure. This is a very basic KubeNet configuration. We have 2 nodes hosted on 10.240.0.4 and .5 IPs, and each node has a /24 route allocated for the host local IPAM to assign to the pods. As you configure the cluster, each pod gets an ETH0 interface anchored inside of the pod, and a VAF pair is anchored on the host. That VAF pair then connects to the bridge. It's called CBR0, which is configured as a simple software implementation of layer 2 switch, and Linux routing, Linux kernel routing is configured as a simple router. You can see it right here to connect the pod traffic to the ETH0 interface on the host itself, and therefore get to outside world. Azure, as cluster gets built, Azure configures the VNet and user-defined routes so that node-to-node communication becomes possible. And when I'm saying node or host, just quick clarification that those two words interchangeable, and both of those refer to a node that represents an AKS, a VM in AKS cluster. And also the network address translation can be used if you want to communicate outside of your cluster. So for the second option, looking into how Calico, KubeNet plus Calico option gets configured. So you can see now the bridge is gone. There is no necessity when Calico CNI is used to use the bridge. Calico connects directly, Calico virtual interface directly connects to the Linux kernel router, which connects then to the outside of the node. So the traffic is going from the pods to Kali interface to the Linux router to host ETH0, and then to Azure ANI, and then flows to the destination, reversing the direction if the pod is hosted, for in this example, on the node 2. And the last option, or next option that I I want to show that's the Azure CLI configuration with Azure IPAM. So in this case, you can see that the Calico interface is replaced with AZV. That's how the when Azure CLI is used, all interfaces going to have that prefix. And instead of having the non-routable network, so now you can see our pods get the IP addresses from 10.240 instead of 10.244 as it was before. So they are a part and visible to the VNet of your cluster. Therefore, the network is routable. There is no need to configure user-defined routes now, and there is no need to configure the IP forwarding because all pods can communicate directly with each other. And in fact, if you have other resources that you want to communicate with the pods, they should be able to reach the pods even by the IPs. So if you networking considerations when building a cluster, with host local IPAM, each node gets /24 IP range for the pods. It is non-routable with KubeNet when using KubeNet option or KubeNet plus Calico. And it is routable when using Azure CLI. So those two differences are very important as you design in your Kubernetes cluster. The VNet size, you need to, especially when using Azure CLI, you need to be aware of how to size the VNet properly so that you do not run into a situation with the IP exhaustion, or keep track of how many pods you're running in the cluster to make sure that you're staying ahead of that. For the Calico networking configuration, the KubeNet plus Calico will give you the Calico CLI. If that's something you want to use and you want to make sure that your pod network is non-routable, that's the option to use. One thing to keep in mind here is that when you're building a cluster with a network policy option Calico, the Calico version is managed by AKS. So you cannot come and just rip it out and replace with any other Calico version that you'd like. If you do that, the AKS controller will revert to the whatever version it originally installed in there. There is an option where you can install unmanaged Calico, and the GitHub repo shows you that option. And also, when you're using Calico CLI, then it gives you ability to fine-tune the IP pool configuration. So you can tweak the block size in there and other settings that Calico IP pools provide. For the network policy, what I mentioned, that there is a Calico policy engine that is managed by AKS, and then you can install unmanaged Calico policy engine with Azure CLI. And when you're doing that, also you need to configure the network mode to be in transparent, network to use transparent mode. That feature is in preview currently, and you need to use an extension to do that. So the guide actually shows you how to install an extension and configure the necessary feature for that. And also, quick note about the Calico open source and Calico Enterprise. If you jump to the website, to Calico website, you can navigate to the Calico Enterprise in here, and there is a table showing you which features you get in Calico open source and which capabilities you get in Calico Enterprise, so that you can see, evaluate which of those options is best suited for your needs. And so before I jump to demo, just want to quickly mention here are a few upcoming sessions that we have scheduled for the rest of this month. We are working on scheduling sessions for the following months as well. There is a trial of Calico Enterprise. You can navigate to tigera.io/trial link and get an environment that is set up, already configured for you. All you need to do, there are some guidelines, some examples, some labs that you can go through, but also you can experiment and try that out yourself without the need of configuring, setting that up by yourself. So the last part is jump into to the demo to build the cluster that I was talking about. So here is one of this. You can see the tabs named Calico SS and Calico Enterprise, CaliAnt. So one is going to represent the open source cluster, the other one Calico Enterprise. So I'm going to, I already built Calico Enterprise just because it takes some time to set it up. But for the advantage for Calico open source, if I run, everything gets configured by the AKS controller, and it takes about probably 5 minutes to do that. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to use the repository, the instructions in the repo to do that. So here is a quick note about the feature registration. There are steps listed in here. I'm using the AKS preview feature because I want to install some of the features that are currently in preview in AKS. Here, I already have it configured in my environment, but these instructions are how you would set it up and how you then can register a specific feature for your Azure CLI. We need a service principal that is going to be used with the AKS cluster. That service principal needs at least the contributor networking role level access to the resource group where you're going to create the cluster. And the instructions in this guide provide you examples how to set it up. So I already have this configured. I can show you that I do have the account already. The next step is to configure in the guide some variables I'm configuring for as helpers to kind of quickly plug things, run the commands. And I already have all these variables in my shell configured. So what I'm going to do is just create a resource group, start from here. Actually, let's double check. G. So I'm going to create my resource group. That's where my AKS cluster object or resource is going to be living. It's worth noting that once you create the cluster, there is an auxiliary resource group created by AKS where the resources for your AKS cluster, additional resources get created. And once it's created, I can show you what I mean by that. So in order to configure service account, set the proper permissions for the service account to the resource group, we need to get resource group ID, then service account ID, or client ID or app ID, depending on the documentation you read. And then do configure role assignment for the resource group. In my case, I'm using the role variable, which is set to the contributor. In some cases, you cannot configure that because the administrator of your Azure subscription may not give you that access. So the network, that's why I put another one, network contributor role in here. that you need to configure as a bare minimum for AKS cluster. Once you've configured the resource group, check the Kubernetes versions available in that region, in the region where your resource group is located. So you can pick and choose from here. Just know that anything with a preview, you will need the AKS preview extension to install preview features. In today's example, I'm going to use 169, which is a fully supported release. And here's the example of the command to run and get your cluster provisioned. Double checking that I have my variables set up here. So you can see a network plugin is set to KubeNet. The network policy is set to Calico. That's the option Calico KubeNet plus Calico, which gives you Calico CNI with host local IPAM and Calico for network policies. Let's make sure this this gets through. One quick plugin here. I'm using SSH key that I have. You can replace this. There is an option to auto-generate these keys and save into the default location. Just look into AKS create -- help or -h, and that will give you a bunch of options that you can use when you're using this when you're using the command to create AKS cluster. So okay, this looks like the command is executed now. So it's going to take about probably 5 minutes to create the cluster. For the time being, I'm going to switch to Calico Enterprise cluster and just show you what I've got in here. Once you get Calico Enterprise installed, a quick way to take a look at what version you're running is to get cluster informations object, and there's a default objects in there. Default object that represents your cluster configuration. So you can see in here, I'm running the Calico core version is 3.14. The CNX version that refers to Calico Enterprise is version 3.00. That's a quick way how to look, how to find out which version you're looking, what cluster type you have, and details about your configuration. If I look through namespaces in my cluster, you'll see there is a bunch of Tigera dash namespaces. Those represent Calico Enterprise components. You won't see those in Calico open source cluster configured. You will see Calico system, for instance, because since Calico Enterprise is built on top of Calico, so some of the components, they are the same. And some of those just represent specific Calico Enterprise features that live in those Tigera dash namespaces. And so while that cluster is getting built, I'm going to go through example of policies that I can deploy and show you how they work in a Calico Enterprise cluster. And I've chosen the examples are posted in this repository under the demo folder. Each example in here, there is an application stack which runs a deployment and a few standalone pods. Then you have a few policies, a few example policies for Calico OSS as well as Calico Enterprise. They can be used in both. And then you have three 0 level. Those are resources specific to Calico Enterprise. And all of this detailed in the README, so you can just walk through the README demo scenarios and copy paste those commands. So what I'm going to do is to deploy my demo app first. And just to show you that I don't have my demo namespace or anything here. Okay, it's empty. So I'm going to deploy my demo application and watch that. Okay, all of that is created already. Calico Enterprise has a feature of tiers where you can stack your policies or to fence the policies stack the policies within those tiers and use RBAC to configure management or access to those tiers and therefore the policies themselves for individual teams within your organizations. In Calico open source, there is no such notion as tier. That's where Calico Enterprise, it extends that and introduces the notion of a tier. So what I'm going to do, and in fact, I'm going to show you quickly without diving into the details, Calico Enterprise interface. And maybe if we get some time, once I'm done with demos, I can go through the interface and explain a little bit more. But quickly, this is a landing page or landing view, a dashboard that shows you what's happening in the cluster. I'm going to switch to policies, and that's the tiers. You can see the tiers for the policies. That's what I was referring to as tiers. So I have currently 2 tiers: allow --tag era and default tier. In Calico open source, you would get this default tier only. All the policies are going to be stacked in here. In Calico Enterprise, you have the ability to create these tiers. The reason I'm showing this view is that I want to apply a specific tier, create a new tier, and show you once it's applied, it's showing up in my Calico Enterprise UI, and you can start creating policies in there. So the next step is to, I'm going to attach to, I have 2 pods running, standalone pods, one CentOS, one NetShoot. CentOS pod is making connections to, is curling google.com. NetShoot is trying to, is curling the Open Nginx service, which is part of the deployment in the cluster. So you can see in here, there are 2 Nginx pods. There is a CentOS and there is NetShoot. And the reason I want to attach to the log stream is to show that everything is going, executing smoothly, and I'm getting the responses that I'm expected to get. So you can see both of this are getting the response. Everything is going fine. Now I'm going to apply the default deny policy, which basically takes the approach of the list privileged access, where you will have to configure whitelist any flows within your cluster that you want to allow. Everything else is going to be denied by default. So the policy itself, if I jump to configuration here, and show you default deny, the policy itself, you can see that it's going to be put into the security tier. I'm giving it an order of 1,000 so that I can create policies between 0 and 1,000 that can be evaluated before they deny all policy, and therefore I can allow certain connections or certain flows. And the policy, you can see it uses ingress, egress. So this policy just blocks all ingress and egress traffic. So once the policy is implemented, you can see that both of these have stopped getting the response. They cannot reach and communicate with the other. Example that is built for Calico Enterprise is around, there is just one example in here using DNS policy, a feature that is specific to Calico Enterprise, because the example that is applicable to Calico open source is applicable to both. So if you look into this folder, DNS policy folder, there are the policy itself for DNS. It leverages a few objects. Calico enforces policies are used in the labels assigned to Kubernetes resources. So you can see there is one flow that is allowed using the label domain equals external, and there is another flow that is denied that's specific to egress in terms of direction of the flow that is denied where type equals public. And there are two objects that have those labels that are defined in here. One is global netset, which is to external domain, where you can define the domain names and also the wildcard is allowed. You can use that. And for instance, in this example, I want to make sure that I can curl Google with www.google.com as well as just google.com. So if I put the star in there, that would cover anything.google.com, but won't cover the Google.com. So that's why I have to put the two of those. And the second object, second resource, also using the global network set, where a bunch of IP addresses are defined, and those are known public IP ranges. You can see there is like all the way from 1 to 20 defined in here. And if we take a look in the policy and read it, the egress, this policy allows egress to port 53 within the cluster, the UDP over the UDP protocol, and allows access to the external, which is our global network set representing the Google, and then denies any egress to any other public IP. So let's deploy this. Okay, so on the right-hand side, that's my center spot. Right now, there is a connection established in there trying to get to the external resource. And it's not going to get it until that connection times out, because I deployed the policy in the middle of that attempt. So it takes about probably 30 seconds or so for that connection to time out. Because I did not have a policy that specifically targets my Nginx, so Nginx, not Nginx, my NetShoot pod and Nginx service, I won't get the access to my Nginx instances within the cluster. However, the policy, if you jump back to the policy, you can see that it uses this selector that applies to both pods. So I should be able, from my NetShoot pod, curl the Google resources. So if I just run a command to curl Google, I'm going to the pod. I haven't allowed the access yet, so I'm missing something. Trying to figure out which step I missed. Okay, let's take a look into the Tigera UI. So I have my I have my default deny. In fact, we can go and drill into it and take a look. Okay, it's deny access. It's all good. And this is my allow policy that applies to AppNet shoot and app CentOS. That's also fine. So what we can do, since I have the utility pod running, I can get into my netshoot pod and test the connection. I feel like my kubectl is wrong. That's fine.
Are you trying to get into netshoot, Ivan?
Yes, trying to get into the netshoot pod to test the connection.
Maybe, yeah, /bin/bash instead of just bash.
It should work for both.
Both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the path in there, so it's fine. Okay, let me switch for now to the other cluster, and if once I cover that part of the demo, I'll switch here and troubleshoot this. Should be fun to find out what step I missed. So switching back to Calico OSS, you can see the cluster is built. You get the output in here. For that, you can also go and curl or list the resources in the cluster. So once it's built, let's take a look first. Here's the command, and as the cluster is getting built, you can actually use this command to kind of see the status of the cluster. The provision state is going to show you where that's at the moment. Once you're done, once the cluster is built, you can install, if you don't have kubectl, here's the command, Azure AKS command to install that. I already have it, so I'm going just to use get credentials, which will give me the kubeconfig. And I'm saving that to my local directory so that I can load it up after that. And I believe I already have that set, so. Okay, and that's my cluster. So you can see this number is different from what I'm seeing in my Calico enterprise. So that's a different cluster, just to make sure that that's clear. And so if we jump to the demo scenario here, deploying the same application, same stack. Let me actually show you that I don't have that deployed. Okay, and this can take a few moments because all the images, it's a brand new cluster. All the images need to be pulled. In my Calico enterprise cluster, I had it already pulled. And that's why I'm saying that I missed a step, because I went through the demo several times yesterday. So I'm pretty sure I forgot something. So while this is getting, all the pods are getting up and running, I'm gonna just move to the next and attach to CentOS and netshoot. Let's verify that I'm connected to the same cluster. Yep. That is the cluster information. Okay. Okay, so I got all my 4 running. So you can see the CentOS pod is getting the response, and my netshoot pod is getting the response as well. So one thing to note in here, when you're working with Calico open source, you have to use Calico control or Calico CL command utility to interact and manage, to interact with Calico data store, therefore manage Calico policies. This is an example how you can do that. When you using Calico Enterprise provides an API server to translate all all Calico specific interactions with the Calico data store into just Kubernetes understandable communication pattern. So you can use just kubectl in there. So this is deny policy, similar to, this is a wrong folder for deny policy. That is correct. Oh, yeah. I don't think, yeah, the Calico gets that part. You have to deploy, specify the full path. Feels like I checked in something wrong. Oh, so policies in my cluster, I don't have any. Here's a quick cluster information, just to show you that Calico, the Calico version that is used in an AKS managed setup. So you can see in here, Calico version is 3.5, and you don't really have an option to upgrade this, just because the AKS controller is managing the configuration of it. So for the policy deployment, again, trying to see if I misspelled something, and I do not see anything being misspelled. Everything looks fine.
Can you go back to the error again?
It's right here.
It's weird.
I know, and in fact, I was running this yesterday.
And what's the YAML again? Can I see it? That's networking. Double check real quick.
Yeah, I'm doubting my spelling now, like checking every character in there. Okay, let's do this. Let's double check that we have this resource defined in the cluster. So if we get API resource, right? Okay, so we do have network policies defined. That's all fine. So the resource is correct. Then Next one is going to be API was the second versions, right? V1 and V beta 1. V1 beta 1. And I'm using this one. VSIO. That is correct. It looks totally fine to me. Let's see if my...
Can you go back? Sorry, can you go back real quick to the VM, please?
Let's see if this... say it again.
One second. Yeah, can you just hold on for a second?
Oh, sorry. You should be able to get it from the repo. If you want to take a look, it's the same. Yeah. You can see I don't have any changes in here, so it's the same data.
Yeah, maybe perhaps if it's something to get into later, if you want to keep going.
Let me think. Another 20 seconds in this.
Spec. Small letter. This is a denial, right?
Yes.
Okay, so here's denial.
You know what?
This is just use this.
It's my YAML, then it should be failing here too.
I just pasted this from our docs, so should be, and I know it worked there before, so feel free to use it as well.
I'll see.
Then there's chat. Yeah, I know it works. I mean, this is a default deny, very straightforward.
Yeah, so something's wrong with the cluster configuration. I'm not quite sure why this is doing this. I have a suspicion maybe the AKS cluster got misconfigured for some reason. Because, yeah, this is valid YAML for, and I'm not using the Calico policy in here. I'm using just networking KS IO, which is a standard Kubernetes network policy. I suspect that, let me see the commands. Did I have the, yeah, Calico is in here. Everything seems to be fine in here. So
maybe we'll do another session on
yeah.
digging deeper into this. It's active troubleshooting. Those are the best times for a webinar.
So what I can check, yeah, I have about 8 minutes. So probably, yeah, it's better to transition to questions, and maybe after that, if there is more time left or people want to hang out for a little bit longer, I'll try to troubleshoot this live and see if I can get to the bottom of this in both clusters. So let's switch to questions right now. If there are, let's see. Just stop sharing for a moment. Questions. And yes, the recording is going to be available after the session, and the as well as the slides, and the GitHub repo is already available. It's in the Tigera-solutions GitHub account. So if you go in there and just search for AKS, or let me actually paste the link into the chat. Okay.
If you don't mind, Ivan, putting that final slide just to remind the folks for the next set of webinars, please.
Yes,
I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Screen again. So here's the the sessions that we will run. Okay, so let me get to the chat questions.
One question on BGP.
Can I upgrade policy? I don't know if it's answered. I'm just reading from the top. So can I use upgrade Calico network policy existing AKS in the existing AKS cluster, I guess? Not sure what you mean by that. You cannot upgrade the Calico version if it's managed by AKS, if it's installed by you, like it's done for the enterprise cluster. If you go through the steps in the GitHub repo for installing enterprise cluster, that's Calico version installed managed by Calico operator, and not managed by AKS. So there you can install any Calico version you want. I'm not quite sure what you mean by the network policy upgrade existing network policy, or network policy in existing AKS. Yes, the GitHub link is shared. Okay, I see. Yes, so for the live troubleshooting, if any of you want to hang out for a little bit longer, I'll spend another probably 30 minutes looking into this to see if I can figure out what I did wrong. Ingress should be a small letter, I think, inspect. Ingress is a parameter. Yes, ingress as a value. I don't think so. So the ingress, egress in the policy, for KS. Let's try that. I believe that should be in caps, but let's try and see. Calico. Nope, doesn't work like it. Okay, and I believe you guys can unmute yourself if you have questions. There are not that many on the call, so feel free to speak up. Can you explain how BGP works and configured under Calico? So there are, in a kind of brief, quick overview, Calico is, when Calico installed, there is a component called Calico node. That component is hosted within the system Calico namespace. So in fact, let's take a look quickly. Something's wrong with my store. Oh, kube system. Yeah, so in open source Calico, it's, I believe, in the kube system. Yep, so there is a, and in fact, that's a DS daemon set. So you can see there is a Calico node daemon set is installed, and that component has has a few processes or a few instances that help Calico to facilitate all the networking setup and the policy enforcement setup. So there is a process called Felix that does the policy enforcement on each node. What it does, it talks to the Calico data store, fetching the information about the policies, and then programs the IP tables or whatever data plane you choose. We also support eBPF as of the release of 3.14 Calico open source. So it talks to the, it programs the data plane, by default it's IP tables, to translate those policies into Linux understandable format for the firewalling. Then there is a bird, which is a software-defined router. Has a bunch of settings, can be configured, very versatile, very powerful. We are using that for to facilitate BGP configuration. So each Calico node runs the process, the bird process, which fetches the information configured by a third component in Calico node called conft that fetches the configuration, your BGP configuration from Calico data store and translates that, puts that into a file that bird picks up and then establishes propagates the routes, exchanges the routes between the nodes. So that's what allows Calico to quickly set up host-to-host communications in Kubernetes cluster. The bird clients in each Calico node, they create full mesh right away. And there are different, as you scale your cluster and the number of hosts grows in the cluster, then you need to take certain steps to design steps in how you want that to be configured, the BGP route propagation, so that you do not overwhelm like your cluster if it's in full mesh. You can imagine each node can talk to the other node. The number of routes on each node is going to grow to the factor of 2. So that's when you get to hundreds of nodes in the cluster, that can affect the performance, or can saturate your network. So at that point, what you can do, Calico provides another component called Calico Taifa node, which Taifa is for policy scaling. So at that point, what you can do is to program, since each Calico node contains a bird router, you can program a bird router as a route reflector. You can pick certain nodes and set them up, program a bird component in there as a route reflector, and peer groups of nodes to talk to peer with that route reflector, and so forth. So in that case, you kind of create in these groups of smaller numbers of nodes, which allows you to scale your Kubernetes cluster even bigger. That topic is quite technical, and it's hard to cover that within like a minute of answering that question. Hopefully, I answered to your question about the BGP, how BGP is configured and how Calico uses it. I don't see any other questions at this time. So what I'm going to do is to switch to troubleshooting my Calico Enterprise first. Oh, actually, I know. I thought magic happened. Okay, so let's take a look at what we got deployed in demo, right? Next point. Okay. So network policies. Oh, so my policy didn't get applied. I didn't see my policy in here. Was it global policy? So another thing that I didn't mention explicitly, but you can see that in the examples. Unlike standard Kubernetes network policies, Calico has a global network policy that lives outside of its scope is the cluster-wide, kind of like cluster role bindings. So it lives outside of the namespaces and gets applied to the entire cluster altogether. Okay, so here is my allow DNS netset egress. Figure it. Okay, so let's read through the policy. It's a global network policy, that has this name. That's it. It applies, sits in the security tier and applies to app netshoot and app CentOS. And I have default deny, which is a Calico policy, which is a part of security tier, which has order 1000. And so another thing, order matters in when you're configuring policies. Calico policy model allows you to configure the policies based on the priority. So the lower number means the policy has higher priority and or is first in the higher in the evaluation path. So whenever you'll configure in something like default deny, make sure that you don't put order number like 1 in there, because it's going to be you have only one position with a 0 to beat that. Okay, so security network policy, it's demo, and my global network policy is scoped to, it has order 200. So it comes before default deny. That should be good. It applies to app netshoot, app CentOS. So let's check labels on those two. CentOS, correct. App netshoot, correct. So the policy does get applied to those. Let's do this. Let's remove default deny. Ready. Okay, so let's try this. Let's try to get into the SSH into Node and take a look into what's on the node itself. I put a brief section in here how you can SSH into an AKS node. So let's so first you need to launch in a utility pod. In my case, it's called AKS SSH. And in fact, that's instructions from official doc, AKS doc, so you can do that. If you have a mixed cluster, the second command, it just shows you how you can pin that pod to a specific node. You also can use this to pin to a specific host. So instead of using like /os, you can do /hostname and just put the specific host name, one of your nodes name in there, and then pod will land in there. So once we launch that pod, we need to install the OpenSSH client. And while doing that, I also need to set SSH key so that I can copy it. Let's see if I already have it. And then node name. Yes, I do. It's one of my nodes, right? Yep, it's this one. And to get the node IP, I need to copy it sometimes. Okay, so once it's done, copy the SSH private key into the pod, and that is done from a different browser session, just referencing my SSH key and my pod where I'm going to copy that in destination. And you say set the permissions on that file. In fact, I can show you it's right here. And then SSH, I need to set my node IP to this value. SSH into okay, so I'm inside of that node. Now I can take a look at interfaces in here. So you can see right here, that's what I was showing in the slides. Here's your Azure CLI. You can tell that by looking at the virtual interfaces. They start with AZV. Just looking into the IP tables to see if I can spot my anything lingering or reminiscent of default deny. It's fine to me. Let's see. Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to redeploy the stack because I do not see. Okay, so now it started going. Looks like in my stack there is an issue. Let's think about some other methods. This is fine. So, let's deploy it one more time. Okay, so now both of those default deny got applied, both of those stopped. Apply an AP set, no AP set, okay. So now it's this one through, this is correct. And this shouldn't, the net should, shouldn't because my policy that allows egress only allows to Google. So now if I test, run the command to test the access to Google from within the CentOS pod, I get my access, and if I do the same for the NetShoot pods, I should be able to get the same access. Yep, and now just to make sure, if I try anything else like bank.com, the access should not be allowed because the rule that denies access to any other public IP is enforced. The egress is enforced, and it does not allow access to anything else but google.com. So, okay, this example looks like it's fine. Wondering what wasn't there that it didn't work. Not quite sure, but let's jump to the other cluster. Oh yeah. So, oh, hold on. Am I connected to the wrong thing here? That's correct. let's pick the demo scenario for this one. I can think only of let's try to deploy a Calico policy instead. Maybe there's something wrong here. So if I get my deny all, yeah. So I need to remove security. So let's this. So this is to demo. Okay, so the Calico policy got applied. Looks like there is something wrong with the Kubernetes network policies. I'll test that after this session to figure out why this doesn't work. Maybe maybe some change slipped in and I accidentally committed it. So the Calico policy worked, which is fine. Let's see. I can do egress. So allow CentOS egress. Okay, this deployed. So my CentOS pod, this one should start going. Yep, so you can see the connection now for the CentOS pod is established back. That's my policy, this one. So what it does, it allows the access first to do the lookups against the Kubernetes cluster DNS server, and then allows the any TCP connection egress. There is no DNS policy in the Calico open source, so therefore I had to use something like this, just allow the any egress for that one. That's that's for this demo. And to allow Nginx to talk, I need to deploy three different policies. So now I'm using allow cluster DNS, which is this policy, which applies to the demo namespace, saying that any workload in this namespace, any pod, should be able to make DNS lookups against the internal DNS server. So now you can see the connection for NetShoot pod is reestablished too. Okay, I think this is it. Let's see, any other questions? Yes, this session is recorded and will be posted to the Tigera website once it gets processed, and also I think it may end up on the Tigera YouTube channel. Any last questions before I close this session? If you want to speak up, just make sure you unmute yourself. Okay, I think this is it. Thanks a lot for attending the session, and looking forward to seeing you in future sessions that Tigera team will present. Thank you. Bye.